Jean was preparing to marry her cousin Jack. They had known each other since early childhood, and their affection was free from the stiffness that social upbringing so often imposes. They had grown up side by side, unaware that love was quietly taking root between them. Jean, playful and coquettish, would sometimes tease her cousin gently. She found him handsome, charming, and kissed him warmly each time they met, but never felt that electric shiver that runs through the body like a current, from head to toe. Jacques, for his part, would simply think, "My sweet little cousin," and regarded her with the unconscious tenderness a man often feels toward a pretty girl. His thoughts went no further. One day, Jean happened to overhear her mother speaking to Aunt Albertine, not Aunt Lyson, who had remained an old maid. "I assure you, these children will fall in love. It's plain to see. I believe Jacques is exactly the son-in-law I've always dreamed of." From that moment on, Jean began to adore Jacques. She blushed when they met, her hand trembled in his, she lowered her eyes beneath his gaze and flirted shyly, hoping to provoke a kiss. Soon, Jacques noticed the change. He understood everything and, swept up in a mix of gratified vanity and genuine feeling, embraced his cousin tightly and whispered in her ear, "I love you, I love you." From that day forward began the cooing, the courtship, and all the tender gestures of love which, thanks to their long-standing closeness, caused neither embarrassment nor awkwardness. In the drawing-room, Jacques kissed Jean openly in front of 3 elderly ladies, his mother, Jean's mother, and Aunt Lyson. They spent long hours walking together through the woods, along the river, across damp meadows strewn with wildflowers. They awaited the wedding without impatience, savoring the sweetness of innocent caresses, handshakes, and long, passionate glances in which their souls seemed to merge. A vague yearning for embrace stirred within them, their lips felt a restless longing, as if waiting, watching, promising. Sometimes, after a day of restrained passion and platonic affection, they would feel an inexplicable fatigue in the evening and sigh deeply, not knowing why, unable to understand the sighs born of anticipation. Both mothers and Aunt Lyson watched this young love with tender emotion. Aunt Lyson, in particular, seemed deeply moved. A small, modest woman, she spoke little, tried to remain unnoticed, and never made a sound. She appeared only at mealtimes, then retreated to her room, where she sat behind closed doors. A kind old lady with gentle, sorrowful eyes, she was nearly invisible within the family. The 2 widowed sisters, who held respectable positions in society, treated her as something insignificant. They addressed her with a casual kindness that barely concealed their condescension. Born in the days of Beranger, she had been named Lise. When it became clear she would never marry, she was renamed Lyson. Now she was simply Aunt Lyson, a neat, timid old woman, loved with a mixture of habit, pity, and benign indifference. The children never went upstairs to greet her in her room. Only the maid entered. When someone wished to speak with her, she was summoned. Few even knew exactly where her room was. She seemed not to exist. No one spoke of her, no one thought of her. She was that invisible being who remains a stranger even to close relatives, whose death leaves no void, who never manages to enter the lives or habits of those around her, nor to inspire their love. She walked with small, quick, silent steps, never bumped into anything, as if she imparted to objects the ability to remain noiseless. Her hands were like cotton, so gently did she touch everything. The words Aunt Lyson evoked no thoughts in anyone's mind. It was as if one said, coffee pot or sugar bowl. The little dog Lout had a far more vivid personality. She was constantly petted, called Dear Lout, Sweet Lout, Little Lout. Her loss would have been mourned far more deeply. The cousin's wedding was set for the end of May. Jean and Jacques lived in a state of constant gaze, joined hands, and fused souls. Spring, late and cold that year, suddenly burst into bloom. A few warm, slightly overcast days awakened the earth. Leaves unfurled, and the air filled with the tender scent of buds and first blossoms. Then one afternoon, the sun broke through the mist and flooded the plain. Its jubilant light bathed everything, filling plants, animals, and people with a radiant joy. Birds fluttered, called to each other, beat their wings. Jean and Jacques, overwhelmed by happiness and a new, trembling excitement, sat side by side on a bench by the castle gate, too shy to seek solitude, gazing absently at the pond where swans chased one another. In the evening, they felt calmer. After dinner, they spoke softly by the open window of the drawing-room. Their mothers played piquet beneath the lamp's glow, while Aunt Lyson knitted stockings for the local poor. Beyond the pond stretched the forest. Suddenly, through the young foliage of tall trees, the moon appeared. Rising slowly above the branches etched against its disk, it floated into the sky and, dimming the stars, poured out that melancholy light in which dreams drift, so dear to poets, dreamers, and lovers. At first, they gazed at the moon. Then, yielding to the enchantment of the night, the shimmering lawns and shadowed shrubs, they stepped outside and wandered along the bright meadow toward the pond, gleaming in the darkness. When the 4 rounds of piquet were finished, the mothers, feeling drowsy, retired for the night. "We should call the children," said one of the sisters. The other, gazing out at the pale horizon and the 2 slowly moving figures, gently replied, "Let them stay out in the fresh air. Lyson will wait for them. Won't you, Lyson?" The old maid lifted her frightened eyes to them and answered in a timid voice, "Of course, I'll wait." The sisters withdrew to their rooms. Aunt Lyson rose as well, leaving her unfinished knitting, the ball of yarn and needles resting on the arm of the chair. She walked to the window and, leaning on the sill, began to admire the enchanting stillness of the night. The lovers wandered slowly across the lawn, from the pond to the porch and back again. They held hands and remained silent, forgetting everything around them, as if they had become part of the visible poetry that breathed through the springtime earth. Suddenly, Jean noticed a silhouette in the illuminated rectangle of the window. "Look," she said, "Aunt Lyson is watching us." Jack raised his head. "Yes," he replied, "she's watching us." And they continued their stroll, walking slowly, immersed in the sweetness of love. The grass had grown damp with dew, and both shivered from the chill. "It's time to go in," Jean said. They made their way back to the house. When they entered the drawing room, Aunt Lyson was still knitting. Her face was bent over her work, and her thin fingers trembled slightly, as if from fatigue. Jean approached her. "Auntie, we're going to bed." The old woman looked up. Her eyes were red, as though she had been crying. Jacques and Jean paid it no mind. But Jacques noticed that Jean's delicate shoes were soaked. Concerned and tender, he asked, "Are your sweet little feet cold?" Suddenly, Aunt Lyson's fingers trembled so violently that the needles slipped from her hands and the ball of yarn rolled across the parquet floor. Covering her face with her hands, she burst into tears. Jean and Jacques rushed to her. Jean, shaken, knelt beside her, gently pulled her hands away and repeated, "What's wrong, Aunt Lyson? What's happened?" And the poor old woman, stammering, hunched over in grief, whispered through sobs, He asked you, are your sweet little feet cold?" No one has ever said such words to me. Never. Never.